everyone. I'm Romy Drucker, the Interim Director of K-12 Education at the Walton Family Foundation, and I'm excited about today's program. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the power of community-driven change and the role that Gen Z and Millennials can play in realizing the change they want to see in the world. Here at the Walton Family Foundation, it's our privilege to support their efforts. Last week in San Diego, I had the opportunity to moderate a roundtable discussion with high school and college students from Chicago and San Diego. My partner in this endeavor was actor, activist, and artist Common. Together, we talked to the students about the power of educational change and the ways in which they can create pathways to opportunity for themselves and their fellow students. Here is a summary of the conversation that we had.
This year has taught me a lot. For sure taught me that I can handle a lot more than I thought I could. Really just being responsible for what I have on my plate and making sure I get everything done.
That's kind of like one thing that I learned during the pandemic, to like touch back to your question. Like I really learned that I can do whatever I want, you know, like I can do whatever I want. Like another thing I learned, that every room I walk into, like I'm there because I'm supposed to be there, because I put in the work. That's one thing that's been apparent and evident over the past year. But you know, we took it all in stride, and you know, I learned we can get through anything.
The pandemic for me, it taught me to allow myself and provide myself with grace. You know, when you are speaking to other people and they tell you their stories, you hear the things that they go through and you give them grace, you grant them grace. I pushed myself harder than I needed to, and I suffered because of it, and so I granted myself grace.
That's beautiful too, to know grace. Grace is, that's a word that I hadn't really started embracing that word till like recently.
I feel like sometimes we set low expectations for ourselves, which is bad, and I feel like I need to start learning to, you know, embrace who I am and, you know, be out there and challenge myself more than I have, and that's something that really has stuck to me.
We gotta listen to who we're providing for. It's us that is gonna end up taking care of the future and leading the future. And some people, a lot of people have a lot of great stuff to say, but it just takes the right ear to listen.
I think our policymakers need to put their money where their mouth is. You know, they say that our students are important, they say that our teachers are important, but we are not financially providing for our students in the way they could. There are plenty of well-deserving students out there who are unable to afford college. There are plenty of teachers who I believe are excellent teachers who have stopped teaching because they haven't been able to afford it. And if we're going to create policies, we need to create policies where teachers are paid more.
So I think that if we really want to change some things, we kind of got to take the reins and lead by example and take ownership, take up ownership of some things. But schools definitely, they're here for a reason, so they got to play their role and continue to do the things that they're doing good, but also step up in the places that they're lacking.
Hi, everyone. I'm Caryl Stern, the Executive Director of the Walton Family Foundation. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us today. You know, we're going to talk about communities today, and they're not defined just by place. Communities are defined by shared values, shared experiences, regardless of all of our geography. Millennials and Gen Zs across our nation are advocating for this better future for themselves and basically for all of us. And they're putting their priorities into action right now. And they are united by more than their age. They're united by their belief that they will personally play a role in bringing about a better tomorrow and a change for the future. The Walton Family Foundation recently commissioned a study and research on millennials and Gen Zs, people in their 20s and 30s, and we found out that they are amazingly optimistic. And it led us to really just ask, so why? What makes them so optimistic? And so we went out and we asked the question, and we learned that they are confident in spite of the hardships, but because of the hardships they've faced. They believe that their future is up to them, that they'll be the ones to shape it, they'll be the ones to change it. And today's youth believe that they will create change through actions like voting, like volunteering, like joining and working in an organization that's committed to making a difference. And I realize that when I talk about the spirit and the power of young people, I may be speaking to many of you who tuned in today. So, I want you to know that you're inspiring all of us. And then to those of us who may be more my age, who are a little more concerned with what's our role in this, we have to be ready to embrace the younger generations. We have to really listen. We have to hear how fired up they are, and we have to take that inspiration and go with it. We have to share our leadership spotlight. We have to ensure that their voices are being heard. Take the power of our podium and share it with those around us. We learned a number of remarkable things from our research, but here's just 3 of the findings. We learned that 67% of the young people we spoke with believe they have the opportunity to achieve the American dream. And that optimism was consistent against all ethnic groups, racial groups across the entire country. We learned that 70% say their generation will overcome the obstacles in their way. And they do see the obstacles. It's not that they don't see them. They see racial injustice, they see inability to afford a home, but they just believe that they can and will conquer them. And 78% say that their lives will be at least as good, if not better, than the lives of their parents, which is amazingly optimistic. So today's youth and their responses to the events over the past year, they give me, and I hope all of you, so much hope. One millennium who participated in our study said, and I'm going to quote her directly, "We are resilient. We have lived through a recession. We're living through another one. We're living through a pandemic. We adapt. We survive. And we want to make life better for everyone because we know more than anyone how impossible it is." How's that for a mantra? So young people are our future. We need to remember that. And today's speakers all know that and are going to help us to understand it better. So let me welcome our panel. With us today, we've got Emory Edwards, the Senior Outreach Director for Ed Choice, Catherine Un, Organizing and Advocacy Director at the National Coalition of Young Farmers, Keaton Smith, Board Chair for Partners for Better Housing, and Layla Zidane, President and CEO of the Millennial Action Project. And we're going to do this waterfall, so you'll see us pass the gauntlet from one to the next. So with that, I have the privilege of interviewing Emory Edwards. Let's dive in. So your organization, Ed Choice, brings people together to expand educational opportunities for all families. And one specific area of your work is forging and strengthening relationships with millennials. Why is this community so important that they're a key part of your strategy to bring about positive change?
Well, when we look at the work we do, one of the things that we realize is our work actually builds for the future. And when you look at who's going to be most impacted by improving education, improving access to quality education, improving access to where parents truly are empowered to choose the education that best suits their kids, that's going to be the millennial generation, because they're the ones that are actually starting to raise families that are truly concerned about how the future of education will look. And they want to ensure that, when they have kids, they're actually going to be in a system that truly benefits them. Another reason that we realize is that they're actually closer to what's happening in K-12 education than some of us are, because they just came out of that environment. So they remember the things that they wanted to improve on. They remember the things that they wanted to change. They also remember the things that work great in their favor. So engaging them in an early standpoint, truly getting them involved and understanding how the system works and how we can make some of those changes is very important for us.
So when you think about that, as you said, this is the generation that just came out of the education system, so to speak, and they're the ones shaping it. What are the priorities you're hearing from millennials? What are you hearing from our young advocates? How do they want to see education adapt? Not just for themselves, but even for future generations.
Well, this is one of the generations that has had a choice about almost every aspect of their life. So when you look at, some of the research that you guys have done, some of the research that we've done, they are probably the most open to choice. They want to be able to decide what school works best for them. They don't want the standard K-12 system that we see today. So they're really optimistic. They're really open. They're really engaging. They want to try different things. They want to see an educational system that truly meets the needs of each and every student. And one that doesn't look like the K through 12 classroom that we've seen for the past 30, 40 years.
Can you share an example then, where young advocates really have had impact on the community's education options?
Well, I can actually share a very recent one. So a couple of weeks ago, we actually brought together about 20 young professionals affiliated with the National Urban League. And from this convening that we had with this group, they have already started making plans to travel to Indianapolis to actually do some school tours on their own, just from the conversations that they had there for some of the information that they learned. They've created a group me, they've created Slack channels, and they're just having constant conversations about the information that we presented to them, things that they were excited about, things that they were upset about because they were not aware of it. And just seeing that conviction in them really motivates me to keep doing this work because, like I said, the fact that literally I got an email probably 4 days after the training saying that, hey, we're already putting plans in place. We want to come see you. And usually it's the other way around. We're reaching out to people saying, hey, would you like more information? Would you like to continue this conversation? And they've hit the ground running already with it.
I know that EdChoice conducts all kinds of training programs and outreach activities with young advocates. What are the areas that you think they most benefit from? What are they bringing to the table? What are they asking for? And, how are you seeing them really benefit from what you're giving them?
One of the biggest benefits that we see from them is just the inside knowledge we give them about how the system actually works, the important role that policy plays. What really impresses me, what they bring to the table, is just the level and commitment to advocacy. So once we kind of show them some problems or show them some issues, inform them on some things, they're ready to go. All right, how do we change this? What can we do today? We don't want to just continue talking about this actionable. How can we start making changes, making movements happen right now? That's very exciting because in this work, we know how long it takes to make systems change, and just seeing their energy, they're dedicated, they're ready to go, and they want to know exactly how they can affect change in their communities.
And then finally, kind of EdChoice is on the ground supporting coalitions that are driving high quality educational choice. What are the common education priorities that you're hearing from diverse communities as you support them?
Equity and equality is a big one. They're also wanting to, again, have access to all forms of choice. So understanding, not just charters, but, private school choice. A lot of them are trying to understand what is actual interdistrict choice and open enrollment. So these are some common things that we're hearing a lot is how do we have more access to choosing the schools that work best for us? Some of them, when we show them information about school funding, actually find that very interesting because now they're seeing, the discrepancies in their neighborhoods of if you live in more of a suburban area versus living, in a downtown area, how that spending can differ. And, with this generation, they're not quite ready to move to the suburbs. They want to stay kind of where the action is. So when they see those numbers, they're kind of wondering okay, why does this school get more funding than this particular school? And again, you start to see those wheels turning. So those are some of the commonalities that we kind of hear. Curriculum is one that's also starting to creep up. We've done some specific work with minority communities. So they're really interested in how do we build more culturally affirming curriculum? How do we make sure that teachers are truly connecting with our students to make sure that our students actually are getting to those reading, math proficiency levels that we want? And they know how important that is for the community to play a role in that. So those are probably some of the primary and common themes that we're hearing.
Great. Emory, I'm going to turn this to you now to start the next interview. Thanks so much. Great to have you with us.
Oh, no problem. So, Catherine, it's a pleasure to meet you. The National Young Farmers Coalition is helping to build a bright and just future for U.S. agriculture, in part by supporting the development of the next generation of farmers and ranchers as water leaders. At the risk of asking an obvious question, why are the younger generations so critical to this work?
Thanks for that question. You know, as much as 400 million acres of US farmlands are predicted to change hands in the next decade. So that means that the future of the agricultural system is in the next generation's hands, and that's our generation. And our generation, we're going to have to deal with this decade's biggest challenges: climate change, debt, economic uncertainty. And we have innovative answers to those challenges, but we need a policy landscape that allows us to be our most innovative selves so that we can create the agricultural system that the US needs. And to get that policy landscape, we need to be at the table molding decisions. And so, yeah, that's why the young generation is so critical to this work. And I'm glad you asked about water in particular. I've seen so many really innovative solutions to climate change and agriculture with the least amount of water in really resilient, climate resilient practices. I have a neighbor who's using technology to decide exactly how much water needs to go where, when. But to be able to use those technologies, we need to have access to water and be on like water board decision-making moments so that we can have that policy environment that we need.
So many supports and safety nets have been dropped out from under people during the COVID-19 pandemic. The coalition was able to help young farmers sustain themselves during this time by connecting them to stimulus and recovery resources that would otherwise not have been available or accessible. How did that happen, and what skills and traits did you see rise to the surface when young farmers were put to the test?
To the question about how we connected young farmers to the resources that they needed during COVID, it goes back to one-on-one relationships. We phone banked about thousands of farmers in our network to make sure that they knew of the resources that existed, that they had outreach that made sense to them, where we were speaking their language, not speaking policy or programmatic language, and sometimes where we were literally speaking their language. So we're doing outreach in Spanish, for instance. And we know their story, so they trust us to tell them in this moment that is a moment of challenge, of panic sometimes. They trust us to help them navigate the challenges. On the question of what skills and traits that we saw kind of come through with the pandemic, I'd say resilience. It's a word that's been kind of overused with the pandemic, but really one that describes young farmers in the US during this really difficult year. Resilience and passion and dedication to local food systems. They, young farmers, we changed our businesses sometimes. Instead of selling person to person, we had to go online. Some people built a driveway so that people could go right up to a pickup spot instead of being able to go to farmers markets. Those maybe sound trivial, but they are huge decisions for a small business. And we saw farmers just work overtime to make sure that our communities continue to be fed.
That's awesome. I mean, like you said, resiliency is something that a word that we've used a lot over the past 6 months since we've kind of dealt with this pandemic. So another thing that your coalition does, you regularly survey members and report that young farmers are more open to innovation and conservation-minded farming practices than the traditional agriculture community. How do these values translate into priorities for young farmers?
We believe in democratic and equitable decision-making. And so what that means is we decide on all of our campaigns and advocacy issues directly with our network. We have a policy committee made up of young farmers who helps us see what the issues on the ground are and helps us be as responsive as we need to be in order to provide the the right amount of support at the right time. And that policy committee, it's not only democratic, but it's equitable. So we make sure that we have seats reserved, for instance, for BIPOC farmers or queer farmers or veterans, so that we're hearing voices that are usually underserved and underrepresented in these kinds of decision-making rooms.
Speaking of policy, your members get a crash course in public agriculture policy. Is it important for today's young farmers to be tomorrow's policy leaders? Are they needed more doing the work on the ground, or is there room for them to do both?
I think the question is less, is there room for us to do both, than do we have the choice or not? We are fighting climate change. We're fighting equity in agriculture. We're fighting an economic landscape that honestly is stacked against young farmers and the types of production that we're interested in. So I wish I could say that we could just be in the fields doing the work that we're passionate about and that honestly we're good at. But like I said in the beginning of this interview, I don't think we have the choice. We have to be in decision-making rooms so that the U.S. agriculture system can be molded to face tomorrow's challenges.
So in closing, your coalition is a growing organization with a mission to represent, support, and train young farmers with a particular focus on inclusiveness for gender, race, and sexual orientation. Why is this diversity important to the coalition and your community of farmers? And how have you seen this community come together across traditional lines of difference?
It's not diversity per se that's important to us, but equity. It's about, at least to me, it's about rectifying the history of U.S. agriculture that has and continues to under-resource and underrepresent communities, including communities of color and queer communities. And so it's important to me, at least that's what I believe in, that the U.S. agriculture system of the future is one that's equitable. How have I seen people come together across lines of differences? I've seen, especially this year, just an incredible support for equity, and especially an incredible support from our farmers and our network. They want to see a system that is different, that is, provides culturally appropriate foods, provide foods to the communities that currently aren't fed, and they want the policy system that supports that. The policy system on their side, we've seen a lot of pushback. There's a couple campaigns right now, like the current Relief for BIPOC Farmers, that we're seeing both incredible surge of support, but also an incredible kind of counteraction. And so, yeah, I hope that the message here isn't just coming across lines of differences or isn't limiting itself to diversity, but it's really a push for equity and justice in agricultural systems.
Well, I definitely appreciate the work that you're doing. And now I turn it over to you to do our next interview.
Thank you. Hi, Keaton. And yeah, like many of the rapidly growing regions in the country, Northwest Arkansas is starting to experience shortages of housing options that are affordable. Partners for Better Housing is working to proactively address this emerging issue. Can you talk about how the current environment impacts access to home ownership for young generations?
Thank you, Catherine. It's an honor to be interviewed by you. Excited to meet you all. So I think there are a couple of local and national dynamics at play within housing. Clearly, housing as a policy issue is much more top of mind than it ever has been before, which creates some opportunities for structural change, both at the local and the national level. Really can't talk about millennials and housing without starting with student debt. Student debt both impacts our debt to income ratios as well as our ability to save for a down payment. And the reality is that many folks are feeling like home ownership is out of reach. So you combine that with increased cost, skilled labor shortages, and it's an interconnected system that we hope in Northwest Arkansas, as a smaller but fast-growing region that's done a really good job of adding quality of life amenities, that we can learn from the successes and mistakes of other larger metros that have been that have been working on housing solutions for longer than we have, and sort of get out in front of a looming crisis.
And at the same time, you want to make Northwest Arkansas a national model for inclusive economic growth. How do you define inclusive growth, and how does it reflect the values of millennials and Gen Z generations? What are you hearing from them regarding their vision for your community's future?
Yeah, I certainly can't speak for all millennials and members of Gen Z on this one, but I think millennials and Gen Z want what everyone else wants from their communities, whether that's basic needs like a safe place to live and food and a sense of community, or it's longer term, larger scale issues around community resiliency, quality of life, and social capital, and social networks. So we hear a lot of concern from folks who want to own their own house. We're a home ownership focused housing organization, and housing in so many ways is deeply personal, and I think many of us are sort of grasping for agency and control in our everyday lives, and when we see the rental prices of housing continuing to increase, millennials and many other generations are often at risk of displacement from rising housing costs. That really strikes to the core of our feeling of our sense of security, and feels like we could be uprooted at any time. So sort of creating another rung on the home ownership ladder and creating access to that first step towards the first steps towards housing security and long-term stability, I think is something that everyone values.
And as rental prices increase, housing prices are increasing too, and homeownership becomes more and more difficult for working individuals and families. What approach is Partners for Better Housing following to develop neighborhoods that reflect the values and aspirations of younger generations that are still accessible to them?
Yeah, so we are a mixed income homeownership nonprofit developer. So we're building a 80 home mixed income neighborhood that will have a mix of market rate homes and below market rate homes that are reserved for income qualified buyers. So it's, and we start with the design of the neighborhood. We believe that neighborhoods, the design of neighborhoods and the design of homes can be a foundational building block to creating community, but also creating social capital and the social networks that we know are so impactful for economic mobility, as well as a social safety net. So, we're just getting started with our neighborhood development project. We've built a few homes, and we're excited to scale up our organization and use this proof of concept to tackle things at a broader, more regional level, and address some systemic changes.
That's really impressive work, and thank you for it. You are a millennial leading a significant operation. Has there been a reaction to your leadership from others in the field? What about your experience makes you passionate and prepared for the change that you seek?
Well, I am on the older end of millennials. So maybe my slightly receding hairline here gives me a leg up in some of those conversations. But, I was drawn to housing through concern about climate change. And when we think about how we can impact climate change and community resiliency on a local level, housing and land use is one of those areas of local decision making that feels like it's within our locus of control. It's the passion is almost the easy part, and the challenge is to have the big vision of everything, all the interconnectedness of these issues, and then still be able to zoom in and figure out what the next tangible next step is for me to take today.
Thank you, Keaton. This was really great learning more about your work, and I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Layla, so excited to hear from you. The Millennial Action Project is an organization committed to educating and activating young leaders to bridge the partisan divide and transform American politics. What is unique and special about millennial lawmakers? What are the big shifts young Americans want to see?
Well, thank you, Keaton. I love this question because, as you just said, Millennial Action Project works with young elected officials every single day. And I think that if what I get to see is any indication of the future, then we are in a really good spot. So MAP works with about 1,600 young elected leaders, both at the congressional level and in state legislatures. And what we're seeing, both for people who are running as well as people who are actually casting a ballot, is that young people are idealistic. People want to solve problems, but people are also very fiercely independent-minded. And I liken this to sort of the difference between Netflix and cable, where, back in the day, people were happy to just subscribe to a cable package and just get every channel that the package comes with and sort of say, okay, this is what I've got. And today, young people are a Netflix generation. We are much more likely to pick and choose a la carte what shows or services we're interested in. And I think that's reflected in our politics. And for young elected leaders, that really represents an opportunity to be a lot more curated in how you create your worldview, how you think about solving problems, and how you connect with your community in a much more, I think, personalized way that really reflects sort of the challenges that a community faces. I think for young people, what that says is we are defining a new way of doing politics, one that is not just sort of only values driven, or one that is only driven by let's figure out how to compromise and work with other people, but actually sort of a third way that is, let's be inclusive about how we think about solving problems. Let's figure out who we can build a coalition with to move this issue over the finish line, and how can we do the most good for the most number of people. And so I think for me, that's what gets me excited about young leaders. I think the shifts that they want to see, that young people want to see, is really about that word solutions. And I think that's what we're seeing young people really work towards.
Love it. Thank you. So your organization works directly with America's leading young policymakers at both the federal and state levels to spur innovative and often bipartisan policy solutions. What topics and issue areas do you see the most collaboration or potential for collaboration?
Yeah, there's, so many issues that impact us as a generation are not left or right issues, but future or past issues. And so it's thinking, what is the future that we want to build together? And so there's so many issues that fall under that umbrella, but I think one in particular that has been really electrifying for this generation, no pun intended, is the idea of energy and climate and how we can create resiliency in our communities while also protecting the planet. So that's one area in which we've seen a lot of collaboration and a lot of innovation, actually, in thinking about how can we invest in our communities and the energy infrastructure of our communities while protecting. I heard us talk a little bit about water quality and other ways in which we can really create thriving communities that are also sort of moving us forward. The criminal justice system is another issue where I see a lot of bipartisan conversation being driven by young people. At MAP, we actually have something called the Criminal Justice Reform Advisory Council, which is made up of young elected leaders from across the country, both Ds and Rs, who are working together to share best practices, share ideas on how to actually build inclusive policy around reforming the justice system. Just a few months ago, we had a piece of legislation passed in Oklahoma called Ida's Law that seeks to invest in the local community's ability to get justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women. So thinking about who's missing from the conversations around justice and what can we do to help support that. And then the last sort of issue that I would point to is one that I think young people really care about. And it's one that I've heard, I think, almost every speaker talk about so far, which is economic opportunity. The future of work it's not coming, it's here. And we need to make sure that we remain both competitive in a globalized economy in terms of workforce development, skills training, but also as things like the gig economy become more prevalent. What are we doing to change the relationship between workers and their employers to make sure that we are creating sort of the conditions for everyone to have economic opportunity in the future? So those are sort of three kind of top of mind issues, but I think really anything that can be defined as future oriented is one that you can get a lot of generational consensus around.
That's very encouraging, and love to hear the future framing. The Millennial Action Project recently briefed members of Congress within its network on research about Millennial and Gen Z views and priorities regarding future opportunity and the American dream. The research found that these generations are optimistic about their futures and they plan to make meaningful change in their lifetime. Where do you see opportunity for young Americans to take action? And how can they help make our democracy stronger?
Yes. So that briefing was so much fun because we got to put into practice the numbers and data and the quantitative sort of beeps and bops to the actual young people who are making the decisions that are going to ripple throughout this country. And I think the stat that stood out for me was sort of this question of who do you think is going to bring about a positive change in your lifetime? And the two top answers were people who are elected to office and me. So me and people who are elected to office. And so what that tells me is that, sure, there might be a dissatisfaction in the political status quo, but young people recognize their own power to take matters into their own hands and build the change that they want to see. Over the past election cycle, Millennial Action Project actually tracked a 266% increase in young people running for Congress. And so we're seeing that bear out. And I think sort of the message of all of this for me and the takeaway is sort of this founding idea of e pluribus unum, out of many one. And as more and more young people run and win elected office, being more representative of the diversity of this country, we're seeing them strengthen our democracy by returning to that idea of e pluribus unum just by showing up. And I think the report you just mentioned, Keaton, really indicates that we're on a trajectory to see even more of that commitment to our democracy.
Thank you so much, Layla. As a quick final question, what makes you hopeful for the future?
Oh my gosh, that's got to be hopeful for everyone. Hopefully everybody watching this is jazzed to hear that we saw a 266% increase in young people running for office. So I'm just excited and heartened to see the work that young people are doing together today. And just hearing all of the speakers before me also makes me hopeful that they've got the resources to be successful as they take on these challenges.
Thanks, Layla. Passing it over to you.
Thank you, Keaton. And I have the great honor of bringing it full circle back to Caryl. So Caryl, let's do this. My question for you is, what is the Walton Family Foundation learning from younger generations about affecting change? And does it influence your strategy and impact? Really, to be candid, tell me, why do Gen Z and millennial voices matter?
You know, when I took over the foundation, I remember the first talk that I really gave, I talked about the role of philanthropy and then also the role of kind of people my age. You know, I think it's our job to kind of bridge between the shoulders we stand on, those that came before us, and then those that are going to inherit this world we leave behind. So recognizing that, you know, Gen Z and millennials are 100% of the future of this world, it's critically important if we're going to, you know, help to create a world they will inherit. It needs to be the world they want it to be. And in an effort to do that, the Walton Family Foundation is constantly striving to capture those voices. You know, we most recently did focus groups with teenagers in Northwest Arkansas, and we asked them what values they want reflected in their communities. And it was really interesting to just hear their views. We wanted to just understand their dreams, you know, their aspirations. And they told us they want inclusive schools. They want schools that not only give them, you know, academic excellence opportunities, but really give them practical skills that get them ready to go out into the workforce. They said it's really important to them that they live in communities where their voices are heard. They don't want to be in the background. They want to be an active part of it. They also, you know, have talked to us about the need for clean water. You know, we heard that already from some other people today. Clean water is an issue that is really important to young Americans. And since the Walton Family Foundation is really, really committed to, you know, making sure there's enough healthy, available water for people and for nature to kind of thrive together, that's music to our ears. So end of the day, youth voices matter because these young people are the future.
I love to hear that. And speaking of these young people, they in particular have been thrown for a loop by the events of 2020 and 2021. Their academics have been interrupted. They have lost access to normalcy. So what are you most worried about for these generations? And are you noticing more organizations and communities prioritizing the voices of these young people?
I do hear more people and more organizations prioritizing young voices, but I'm not sure that all of them recognize the psychosocial impact of what's just gone on in the lives of young people. You know, I spent a lot of years doing humanitarian work. I saw what happens after trauma, after a war zone or a natural disaster. And there's always this tendency to say, let's move on. Let's keep going forward. But the reality is something happened. And we have to help our young people find a place for that as well. We have to understand that, you know, the young years are the years where so much of your learning takes place from your peers, and that was taken away from them. We have to understand that for many families, geography changed, that financial situations changed, that many of our young people lost family members. I mean, they have experienced some of the worst traumas, and we can't just move on. We have to help them remember. We have to help them find a way to put that in a better place, which is psychosocial support, which is as important as everything else we've talked about today.
Yeah, that's so important. And one of the things that I love about the Walton Family Foundation is that you believe in community-driven change. And as this session has underscored, a community can be united by shared values and experiences in addition to place. At the end of the foundation's new 5-year strategy, what do you hope to say about the communities where you work? How do you envision the impact?
You know, it's interesting because I've kind of summarized our 5-year strategy with the theme of the launch conference, which is, you know, learning and leading together. That I hope 5 years from now, we will have provided the resources our communities needed so that they can advance their solutions, that we will have worked side by side to find those solutions, that we will have learned from those that worked and those that didn't. and that they've come to see us as a true partner and ally in moving the agenda forward. I think that we know that no one can solve these problems alone. So I also hope that in the next 5 years, we will be part of helping to build coalitions that ensure that all voices are heard, that we use the power of our podium and we share it, and that we also share in the power of other podiums, and that we not only make sure there's a seat at the table, but a microphone in front of that seat so that we can amplify communities.
Well, my final question for you is pointed back at you. Throughout your career, you have accumulated many titles, and perhaps the most fitting is related to this conversation. You are an advocate for today's youth and younger generations. So I would love to hear what advice you would give me, as well as the many young leaders who have joined today's gathering.
It's an interesting thing because I think about, like, do I have the words of wisdom to share? I'm not sure if I do or I don't. I had the privilege to interview over 500 women leaders because many, many years ago, I was asked to do a speech on women in leadership. And I just felt like I was 28 at the time and I wasn't really sure I had a whole lot to say. So I went out and interviewed a whole bunch of other women leaders, and I've kept that up over the years with the same couple of questions. And I've been struck by the themes that have emerged from that, and one of them, and it starts with a saying by Confucius, that our greatest glory is not in never failing, but in rising every time we fail. I did not interview a single woman who couldn't tell me a time she really screwed up and thought, that's it, career is over, life is over, goal is over. And it was, Vince Lombardi said something about how it's not how we fall down, it's how we get up. And it is how we get up. There have been moments in my career, in my fight for things that I think are right, where, boy, I've been wrong, or I have just fallen on my face, and you think that's it, it's over, and then it's amazing how a week later you really can get back in there, get back in that fight, learn from it, share what you've learned, and just be, have the humility to acknowledge you were wrong. And that's probably the best advice I could give.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it, and I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Layla. Really a pleasure to get interviewed by you. So thanks so much. And thank you to Emery, to Catherine, to Keaton, to everybody who tuned in today. I hope that, as you heard, we are all equally excited as Gen Z and millennials are. I hope that we all see the potential of what lays in front of us and the amazing strength in these generations that are assuming leadership right now, and how exciting a moment it is for all of us. I often say that the work that each of you is doing is inspiring. I hope you hear that, because we at the foundation are truly inspired by our grantees and by the many people that serve your organizations. And we are thankful to be part of leading and learning with all of you. So thanks for tuning in today.